Riverside, but I guess they had trains running all over the place back then. And I'm seeing these images in this documentary about this aircraft and life back then. And it brought back some memories of me going with Lillian on that train to see Sheppy. It was a different time. Our country was united.
Mm-hmm.
The whole world was at war, but the people in our land, they were united in purpose.
Yeah.
The purpose was to get through this, and everybody did their job. Everybody did their job. Mom, she worked in a bakery at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But when we left California, apparently that, call it what you will, I don't know if they were married or not, my dad and my mom, but that fell apart. And then there were two trips. One, we came back here so I could meet her family.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that. And I remember very specifically meeting the grandparents, who they were huge. And I'm like maybe this tall. And I remember Loretta, but my cousin, who she was a little girl, but bigger.
Yeah.
I remember her, and then we went back on a train, and then apparently while we were gone, my dad, he sold my mother's car.
Mm-hmm.
She had a nice car back in LA. I guess he needed money or whatever, and he sold it. And she told me later that infuriated her.
I bet.
And not only that, she had purchased war bonds in my name.
Mm-hmm.
And he cashed them in. And she later, after I had grown up, she told me what had happened, and she said that she knew she'd never have anything with him.
Yeah.
And so she made a big decision. She came back not long after that first trip. We came back to stay.
Mm-hmm.
And
to Missouri?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And the war was on full blast. And she was now a single mother. And so I went to live out on the farm. And she stayed in St. Louis and lived with her sister Hannah and Joe on Devonshire, real close to Bishop DeBerg, where now Bishop DeBerg is at, real close. And she went to work in Joe's machine shop on Gravois. He was a successful, hardworking Austrian who Hannah had married. And he was a machinist by trade. He had learned that in Austria before the war. And then they immigrated over here when Hannah was just a teenager. And she met Joe over here.
Yeah.
And so my mom needed a job, so she went to work in Joe's machine shop. They taught her how to operate a machine that made parts. And she made parts for the tanks in those days. Tank turrets that turned with the gun on it.
Yeah.
Well, that needed ball bearings to turn that hardened steel, little tiny balls that would allow that steel thing to turn. And she made those, and she made airplane parts. That's what she told me. And she worked so hard and she was working. There were other women in there, and they competed among themselves about who could make the most parts per hour. And she said she would be by her machine for 8, 10, 12 hours. And one time she fainted. She stayed on her machine. She said she was going to win. She was going to... Anyway, and she fainted. That when I say that the whole world, the U.S. was united, they were.
Yeah.
In that respect, that they knew that this was a terrible thing, and each person had however they found themselves, they had to do their best. And she was trying to do her best. Now, interestingly enough, when she worked there at Heights Machine Shop on Gravois, she became real good friends with another young lady named Moni, M-O-N-I. Moni. And then after the war, everybody kind of, there were no more war contracts to be worked on, and jobs once again, and these soldiers they came back and they needed jobs, so the women were out.
Yeah.
And the ex-soldiers got the jobs, which was only fair, which was only right. Well, now, 1943, 1944, 1945, she's working at this shop. And then, after 1945, now jump ahead, 1954, 53, 54. That's 9 years later. Now, I'm living in Arnold, Missouri. My mother has married the shop foreman that she worked in. Harvey Parr was the shop foreman in that machine shop. She married him.
Yeah.
And they buy a house in Arnold. They have a baby, Patty.
Yeah.
My sister Patty. And I'm going to Immaculate Conception Catholic grade school in Arnold. Now I'm 1954, I'd be 12, I'd be 14, so it had to be before then. 1953, that would have been about right. 1953, 8 years after the war, a new kid comes into Immaculate Conception in our class.
Yeah.
His name is Dennis. Dennis Dedick, D-E-D-I-C, Dennis. And he's from the city. Okay, that's all we know, meaning, I guess, St. Louis.
Yeah.
And I became real good friends with Dennis. For some reason, there were 3 or 4 of us. There was Dale Meyer, me. Dale was a native of Arnold. His family went back a long way there. And then this new kid, Dennis. And we became 3 real good friends in grade school, right? 6th, 7th, and 8th grade.
Yeah.
And one day, Dennis rides his bike. Let's see how it worked out. He rides his bike to our house because he wants to play bottle caps. Bottle caps is you try to find hundreds of bottle caps and you got a stick, and it's baseball, and all you do is you throw bottle caps and you try to hit them. Well, anyway, we're playing bottle caps at my house. And Mom, my mother, she's there and she's watching, and then during a break, we're sitting there and we're talking. She's talking to Dennis with me. Dennis happens to mention his mother's name. He says, my mother's name is Moni. And my mom said, Moni? And then she says, did your Mom ever work at the Heights machine shop on Gravway when you were a little baby, when you were a kid? He said, I think I heard her mention that.
It was her friend.
Well, Mom goes to the phone. Dennis gives her his number at home.
Mm-hmm.
And Mom picks up the phone and she says, Moni, this is Lisa Koenig.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how they reunited.
That's
Moni
cute.
was Dennis's
Mom.
mom. And Mom and
That's
Moni
lucky.
were the two good friends at the Heights machine shop during the war. Well, after that, they met, they talked, and they just, Moni had married this man named Dedick,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't work out. And Dennis
Mm-hmm.
was a product of that marriage, and she had remarried a guy named Jack Koch, Koch, Koch.
Yeah.
And they were now living in Arnold. And what a time they had getting back together.
That's good. That's lucky.
There's a story for you about how things happen. And sometimes it makes you wonder, like the friendship. Dennis could have wound up being good buddies with any of the other. We had 10 or 15 other kids, boys in that class. He chose me and Dale, or we chose him.
Yeah.
And sometimes you wonder, it's like God's hand at work, orchestrating. This is what's going to happen now, because later, this is going to happen. And he's the master puzzle, putting a puzzle together. Orchestrator, he's the conductor.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen in my life too, how seemingly God will conduct. You'll go through, you'll live a certain way at this time, and you'll live a certain way another time. Only later other things will happen, and you'll say, oh yeah. So that's how it works. He's the master conductor. Anyway, it's just a observation that I've seemed to have in my life, and I've seen, and that's just one of them. One tiny little snippet of things that happen that are just, and a lot of people chalk that up to, that's just let's use a word for that, coincidence.
Coincidence.
We'll just say that's coincidence. Just, it'll happen. Things happen.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think, yeah, I guess they can call it coincidence. I kind of think of it in another way.
Yeah.
Let's use another phrase for that. It's God's master plan at work. And why does he do that? And it's because he loves us. He really loves us. He wants us to be happy, and he wants us to honor him for who he is, because he's the one that is organ.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a famous scripture that talks about how the pot, and it's in Psalms, the book of Psalms, how the pot sometimes gets out of hand trying to tell the potter what to do. No, the potter is the one who will make the pot.
Mm-hmm.
We're the pot.